Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, estes nostra salve.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus entered a village where a woman whose name was Martha welcomed him. She had a sister named Mary, who sat beside the Lord at his feet, listening to him speak. Martha, burdened with much serving, came to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the serving? Tell her to help me." The Lord said to her in reply, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and worried about many things. There is need only for one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her." The Gospel of the Lord. A famous evangelical pastor named Rick Warren, and author of a number of books, wrote a book called The Purpose-Driven Church. It preceded his very popular book called The Purpose-Driven Life. In the beginning of that, he talks about how for leading people, you have to first start by understanding what God is doing and being obedient to that. And he uses the analogy of surfers on the beaches of Southern California. And he says that when you look at the surfers by mere appearances, they're just bobbing up and down on their surfboards and they appear to be doing nothing. But what they're doing is they're waiting for the wave. And they're not going to take just any wave, but they want the wave. So they wait for that. And when the wave comes, they start paddling ferociously and get ready to ride that wave. After sharing that story, he says, it's sad that many pastors make a lot of waves but never really catch the wave. And yet, I think the same thing can be said in Christian life in general. Jonah here, and Martha and Mary, they were all given an opportunity to be available. Available, you could say, to the wave, but really available to where God was leading them. Jonah made lots of waves doing that. If you saw the reading from yesterday, because of Jonah and his running away from being available to God, there was a big storm and tempest on the ocean, and he got thrown overboard by the people who were, sharing the boat with him. And he got swallowed by the whale. And let's just say that he was put into a situation where he couldn't refuse. And I was thinking when the psalm was being read this morning, out of the depths I cried to you. Yeah, from the belly of a whale, Jonah did lots of crying for 3 days. Can you imagine? Parenthetically, I would say that I read someplace in a science journal that it's actually scientifically possible that that happened to him, that he was there for 3 days and came out and lived. Well, how would you like that? So Jonah did not want to be available to God, but we're told finally, he says the Lord spoke to him a second time. And I'm sure with the memories of the whale deep embedded in his mind, he decided that he was going to make himself now available to God's mercy. What's interesting is because of his availability, not necessarily with what he wanted to do, he's open to what God has in mind, which is beyond all his possibility. Jonah was allowing nationalism and prejudice to stand in the way of God's will. He did not want to preach to the Ninevites because they were a nation that he detested. They had oppressed his people. That city was part of the Assyrian Empire at the time, and they weren't his favorite people. And yet his prejudice being now overcome to make himself available to God sees the conversion of this people. And not only that, they are bowing to the God of Israel. This would be like God saying to you, I want you to go to Washington and preach at the nation's capital. And all of the Senate and the House of Representatives and the Cabinet Office and the Pentagon all come out and start worshiping God and asking for the Holy Mass. Oh, don't forget, nothing is impossible with God, okay? That's tantamount to what happened with Jonah, because he allowed himself to be available to the fantastic grace of God. Martha and Mary were both available to Jesus, but Martha had conditions. She wanted to be available on her own terms, while Mary just sat at his feet. And so Mary becomes an icon of people who don't think prayer is productive and think it's a waste of time. Prayer is where you make yourself available to God, where you take your precious time away from Facebook and other media sources that distract you, and you sit before God and you make yourself available to Him and His grace and His movements inside of you. In the short term, that kind of availability to prayer seems like it's very unproductive, and yet I've seen time again where a person who is invested over a period of time in devoting their lives to prayer, even if it's 15, 20 minutes a day, great fruit begins to materialize. Great fruit. So Mary stands as this icon of the one who makes herself available to the passivity of Jesus' grace and prayer. Martha, on the other hand, although she is a little bit upset at her sister because she's not taking care of all the household tasks, Martha is available as someone who's willing to run out to Jesus. And you see it here. She's the first one to welcome him to her home. She gets to the door. She's eager to greet him. And a little later in the gospel, when her brother Lazarus dies, she's the one who goes out a distance to actually look for and search for Jesus. In this way, her availability is the availability to seek him. Between Martha and Mary, both their types of availability have a worthy place in all of our spiritual lives. There is a time when it's right to diligently seek Jesus. And there is a time when it's right to sit at his face and allow yourself to be found by him.
Regina Celi, let our